I was sitting in my home office, the glow of my monitor the only light in the room. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. I had just closed my laptop, feeling a rare sense of satisfaction. The final slide deck for the Helios project, a merger deal worth $500 million, was perfect. I had spent 6 weeks analyzing revenue streams, risk assessments, and market synergies. This presentation was my ticket to a promotion. I poured a glass of water and prepared to head to bed. Then, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a server alert from the company's secure cloud drive. The notification read, "File modified, Helios_final_presentation. PPTX. User, Julian_B. My stomach dropped. Julian was my co-lead on paper, but in reality, he was a corporate parasite who hadn't contributed a single slide. Why was he logging in 15 minutes before the server lockout? I logged back in frantically. When I opened the file on the server, my breath hitched. The sleek, data-driven graphs I had spent weeks perfecting were gone. In their place were jagged, unformatted charts. The revenue projections were slashed by half. The risk analysis was replaced with nonsense text. He hadn't just edited it, he had butchered it. He was trying to make me look incompetent so he could swoop in with a backup and save the day. I stared at the corrupted file, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The timestamp showed 11:50 p.m. If I fixed it now, the server would log my name as the last editor. Julian would just log back in at 3 a.m. and sabotage it again, claiming I was the one messing with the files. He was playing a game of attrition, banking on my panic. I looked closely at the data he had inputted. It wasn't just wrong, it was catastrophic. He had changed the growth strategy slide to recommend cutting 80% of the workforce, a move the board would never approve. He hadn't looked at the data closely. He had just pasted in random, aggressive metrics to make the presentation fail, assuming I would be the one standing at the podium stuttering. He wanted me to crash and burn so he could step over my professional corpse. I realized then that fixing the file would only delay the inevitable. If I wanted to stop Julian permanently, I couldn't just block his punch. I had to let him throw it and miss. I closed the server file without saving. I let the sabotage stand. I spent the next hour meticulously backing up my original, correct presentation onto a secure, encrypted USB drive that only I had the password for. I labeled the file, backup_do_not_touch. Then, I went back into the company server. I didn't fix Julian's mess. In fact, I made a subtle change to the file properties, locking the editing history so it would be harder to trace immediately, unless you knew where to look. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to think he had successfully destroyed my work. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. I was exhausted, but a cold, hard adrenaline was keeping me awake. This wasn't just about a presentation anymore. This was about survival. Julian had been stealing my credit for 2 years. He had gaslit me in meetings, talked over me in reviews, and smiled while doing it. Tomorrow, that smile was going to be the reason he lost everything. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I just visualized the crash. I walked into the office at 8 a.m. sharp. The atmosphere was electric. The board members were flying in from London and Tokyo. Julian was already there, standing by the coffee machine in a navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He looked fresh, rested, and arrogant. "Big day, Rowan," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. His grip was too tight. "You ready? You look a little tired. Up late working on the slides." "Something like that," I said, forcing a weak smile. I needed to play the part of the frazzled, unprepared victim. "Don't worry," Julian said, winking. "I looked over the deck on the server this morning. It looks interesting. Bold choices." He was taunting me. He knew the deck was a disaster because he made it that way. He was waiting for me to panic, to run around screaming that the file was corrupted. When I didn't, a flicker of confusion crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. He thought I was just too stupid to notice the changes. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:30, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my screen. Julian walked by again, checking his watch. "Hey," he whispered, "if you're feeling overwhelmed, I can take the lead. I know the board can be intimidating for you." This was his play. He wanted to save the presentation after I failed. I decided to accelerate the timeline. I looked up at him, feigning nausea. I rubbed my stomach. Actually, Julian, I don't feel well. I think I ate something bad. Would you mind driving the slides? I can handle the Q&A, but I don't think I can stand up there for an hour. Julian's eyes lit up like a predator seeing a wounded animal. Of course, Rowan. I'm a team player. I'll handle the presentation. You just sit back and recover. He thought he had won the lottery. He was going to present the Sabotaged deck, but he didn't know it was sabotaged with bad data. He thought he had just swapped in a slightly worse version to make me look bad. He hadn't actually read the slides he pasted in. The boardroom was cold and smelled of expensive leather and fresh coffee. Evelyn, our CEO, sat at the head of the table. She was a woman who didn't tolerate fools. Beside her sat the investors from the Helios Group, men and women who controlled billions of dollars. They looked serious, tapping on their tablets. I sat at the far end of the table, clutching my water glass, looking pale. I had my USB drive in my pocket, burning a hole in my leg. Julian stood at the front of the room, connecting his laptop to the projector. He logged into the company server and opened the file, Helios_final_presentation, PPTX. Good morning, everyone, Julian announced, his voice booming with confidence. Rowan is feeling a bit under the weather, so I will be walking you through our strategy for the merger. We have some exciting numbers to show you. Evelyn looked at me, concerned, but nodded at Julian to proceed. The trap was set. Julian clicked the remote. The title slide appeared. It looked normal. Julian smiled, pacing the room like he owned it. As you know, we have been analyzing the market synergies for 6 months. He clicked to the second slide, Executive Summary. The text on the screen was slightly off-center. The font was Comic Sans. A murmur went through the room. Using Comic Sans in a billion-dollar merger meeting was a cardinal sin. It looked like a third grader's book report. Julian frowned slightly, noticing the font, but recovered quickly. Apologies for the formatting glitch. The substance is what matters. He hadn't realized yet that the formatting was the least of his problems. He was so confident in his ability to bullshit that he thought he could talk his way through a bad font. He clicked to the next slide. Slide 3 was the revenue projection. This was the most important slide in the deck. It determined the valuation of the company. Julian gestured to the screen without looking. As you can see, our projected growth over the next 5 years is exponential, leading to a 30% ROI by year 3. He turned to look at the screen to emphasize his point. The graph didn't show growth. It showed a steep, vertical red line crashing into the x-axis. The title of the graph read, Projected Bankruptcy Timeline. The room went dead silent. What is this? Evelyn asked, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Julian froze. He blinked. He looked at the remote, then back at the screen. This must be a placeholder. The data didn't load correctly. It looks like loaded data to me, one of the investors said dryly. It says we lose all our money in 6 months. Instead of stopping, Julian panicked. His ego wouldn't let him admit he hadn't prepared. He tried to improvise. He thought he could spin the data on the fly. Well, Julian stammered, sweating visibly now. This represents the, worst-case scenario. If we don't merge. Yes, this is the, do-nothing, scenario. He clicked to the next slide, hoping for salvation. Slide 4, Market Analysis. The text on the slide read, our target demographic is people who don't know how to use the internet. A laugh barked out from the back of the room. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a shock laugh. Julian's face turned crimson. He looked at me. I kept my face perfectly neutral, sipping my water. He couldn't blame me yet. He had claimed he prepared the deck. He had claimed he reviewed it this morning. Julian was drowning, but he kept clicking. He was in a freefall, and the only way out was down. Slide 5, Cost Reduction Strategy. The bullet points appeared one by one. Fire all staff over age 50. Outsource customer service to AI bots with zero training. Stop paying rent on the headquarters. The investors were now looking at Evelyn with open hostility. Is this a joke? The lead investor stood up. Is this how you run your company? Age discrimination and eviction. Evelyn stood up, her face a mask of fury. She looked like she was about to throw her coffee mug. Julian, explain yourself, immediately. Julian pointed a shaking finger at me. Rowan made these slides. I just pulled them from the server. All eyes turned to me. Julian looked relieved to have a scapegoat. He thought he had found his exit ramp. He sabotaged it, Julian shouted, losing his composure entirely. He knew I was presenting. He changed the files to embarrass the company. Evelyn looked at me. Rowan, is this true? Did you create this garbage? I stood up slowly. I didn't look sick anymore. I buttoned my jacket and walked toward the front of the room. Julian, I said calmly, my voice steady. You told the board 5 minutes ago that you reviewed the deck this morning. You said you prepared the strategy. Did you lie to the board then, or are you lying now? Julian stammered. I glanced at it, but you built it. If you glanced at it, why didn't you notice the bankruptcy graph? I asked. I reached the podium. I'm sorry for the confusion, everyone, I said to the investors. There seems to be a version control issue. The file Julian is presenting appears to be a corrupted draft or something else entirely. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. It looked small and insignificant, but it was the most powerful thing in the room. I have the verified, finalized data right here. It was saved offline to prevent exactly this kind of server error. May I? I looked at Evelyn. She nodded, desperation in her eyes. Fix this, Rowan. I unplugged Julian's laptop. He tried to block me. No, wait, we need to check the logs. Sit down, Julian, Evelyn snapped. Let him fix your mess. I plugged in my drive. I opened the file Helios_final_presentation_real, PPTX. The screen refreshed. Beautiful, clean, professional graphics appeared. The font was Arial, crisp and clear. The revenue chart soared upwards in blue and green. The strategy was sound, ethical, and brilliant. The mood in the room shifted instantly. The tension evaporated. The investors sat back down, opening their notebooks. This, I said, pointing to the graph, is the actual projection. As you can see, we anticipate a 25% market capture in year one. I delivered the presentation flawlessly. I didn't look at notes. I knew every number by heart because I had done the work. Julian stood in the corner, shrinking with every slide I nailed. He looked like a ghost. When I finished, the investors had questions. But they didn't ask me, they asked Julian, just to see him squirm. They wanted to test his knowledge. Julian, the lead investor asked. The previous slide you showed, the one about firing people over 50. Was that your strategic input? Julian turned pale. No, I didn't write that. I told you, Rowan changed the file. But you presented it, the investor said coldly. You stood there and tried to justify a bankruptcy graph as a worst-case scenario. You clearly have no grasp of the data. You were winging it. I was improvising. Julian yelled. You were lying, the investor corrected. And you wasted our time. Evelyn wasn't satisfied with just the presentation. She wanted blood. She called the IT director into the room right then and there. She wanted to know exactly what happened. I want to know who edited that file on the server, Evelyn ordered. And I want to know when. The IT director logged into the admin console from the main computer. He projected the log onto the big screen. File modified, 11:45 p.m. User, Julian_B. The room gasped. The evidence was undeniable. I didn't change the data. Julian screamed. I just swapped the file name. I wanted to make sure I had the latest version. So you logged in at midnight, Evelyn said, her voice icy. And you uploaded a file. And that file contained offensive, destructive content. Why would you do that, Julian? I spoke up. Actually, Evelyn, I think I know what happened. Julian likely tried to upload an old, corrupted version to make me look unprepared, assuming I would be presenting. He didn't read the content of the corruption. He just wanted the file to look broken. I looked at Julian. You didn't read the lorem ipsum text, did you? You didn't check the graphs. You just assumed it would be a blank screen or a glitch. You didn't realize you were uploading a resignation letter disguised as a presentation. Julian looked at the screen. The metadata didn't lie. His login, his upload, his laptop. He had trapped himself. Evelyn stood up. Julian, you are done. Evelyn, please, it was a prank. It was just office politics. Julian pleaded, sweat running down his face. You sabotaged a $500 million deal, Evelyn said. That's not politics. That's gross misconduct and corporate negligence. She pressed the intercom button on the table. Security to the boardroom. Immediately, 2 large guards entered. Julian tried to gather his things. Leave the laptop, Evelyn ordered. That's company property. And considering what we just saw, it's evidence. Julian was marched out of the room in front of the investors he had tried to impress. He looked at me with pure hatred. I didn't smile, I just watched him disappear through the heavy doors. The room was quiet after Julian left. The air was heavy with the aftermath of the drama. Evelyn turned to the investors. I apologize for that display. It appears we had a personnel issue that has now been resolved. The lead investor looked at me. The personnel issue seems to be gone. The talent seems to be remaining. He nodded at me. That was a remarkable recovery, Rowan. Most people would have cracked under that pressure. I believe in the data, I said simply. The numbers don't lie, even if people do. Evelyn gave me a look of immense gratitude. I had saved the deal, and in doing so, I had saved her reputation. We spent the next 2 hours going through the real deck. The investors were impressed. The sabotage had actually worked in my favor. It created such a stark contrast between Julian's incompetence and my competence that the deal seemed safer in my hands. By 1 p.m., the term sheets were signed. The merger was a go. Evelyn walked the investors to the elevator. When she came back, she looked exhausted but relieved. She sat down next to me. You knew, she said. It wasn't a question. I knew what? I asked innocently. You knew he tampered with the file. You had a backup drive ready in your pocket. You let him walk into that propeller. I looked Evelyn in the eye. I knew the file on the server was wrong. I didn't know he would volunteer to present it. If I had presented, I would have just plugged in my drive and said, server error. But he stole the stage. I just let him have it. Evelyn stared at me for a long moment. Then, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. He dug his own grave, she said. You just didn't take away the shovel. Exactly, I said. Well, she sighed. He's buried now. I walked back to my desk. Julian's office was already being cleared out by IT. They were boxing up his awards, his fancy stapler, his framed photos. It was a ghost town in there. The rest of the team was whispering. They had heard the shouting from the boardroom. What happened? A junior analyst asked me. Julian decided to pursue other opportunities, I said. Effective immediately. I sat down at my desk. The blank wall that Julian used to stare at me from was now empty glass. The office felt lighter, like a heavy fog had lifted. The next morning, a company-wide email went out. Subject, leadership changes. It announced Julian's departure without details and my promotion to director of strategy. I moved into Julian's office. It smelled like his cologne, so I opened the window to let the fresh air in. I found a note in his desk drawer. It was a list of target employees to fire after the merger. My name was at the very top. He had planned to get rid of me the moment the deal closed. I hadn't just saved the presentation, I had saved my career. I shredded the list. A week later, I got a LinkedIn message from Julian. You set me up. My lawyer says I have a case for entrapment. I laughed. I replied, entrapment is when law enforcement induces you to commit a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit. I'm not the police, and you uploaded the file yourself. Check the logs. Good luck with the job hunt. I blocked him. He had no case. The metadata was the ultimate witness. He had committed corporate sabotage, and I had simply allowed him to show his work. With Julian gone, the toxic culture of the department evaporated. People stopped hiding their work. Collaboration returned. I implemented a new rule, no shared server edits within 24 hours of a deadline. We called it the Julian rule, though nobody said his name out loud. Evelyn trusted me completely. I wasn't just the guy who did the work, I was the guy who could protect the work. The team thrived, and for the first time in years, I enjoyed coming to the office. I stood in my new office, looking out at the city skyline. I held the USB drive in my hand, the little piece of plastic that had saved me. I realized that revenge isn't about doing something evil to someone else. It's about allowing them to be who they really are, in front of an audience. Julian was a fraud. All I did was turn on the lights. I tossed the USB drive into the drawer and locked it. The presentation was over. The real work was just beginning.